And welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your host today, UberHansen. With me not today is David, who's on leave doing adult things, I do believe, at this moment in time. So joining me instead is the wonderful Joe DeRosa. We're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills today. Obviously, we're going to celebrate them being 8-2. We're going to celebrate yet another win. We might get into the Kansas City Chiefs next week, but we got a good team to talk about. Joe, welcome to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Uber, thank you for having me, man. It's fun to be back on Roundup. I appreciate you having me. It's literally the returning the favor for how many times I've asked you to be on my show over the past few months. So I'm good, man. Happy to get a win. Happy to see them at 8-2. Excited for this matchup, and yeah, I hope David's having fun, as James says, doing adult things, whatever that might mean. That's a very vague term, but it leads to a lot of interpretive guesses that could be fun depending on who you are.
By adult things, I meant work. So I don't think he's having much fun right now. Yeah, man. 8-2. The Buffalo Bills are 8-2. So before we actually even dive into some news and the team as well, you and I were briefly talking about it before we went live here. But 8-2 right now. The Buffalo Bills are 10 games being 8-2. It's not something that I expected at this point in the season. I'm thrilled by it, obviously. So what's your kind of state of the Bills? How are you looking at this season, where we are currently, and what you expected at this point?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit offline. This entire season, to me, I never thought that the Bills were going to be bad. I never thought that they were going to be a team that sucks, that they're going to regress to a point where they were just a bottom feeder in the AFC. We had a floor and ceiling episode once on my show, and I had said that I could see the ceiling for the team being 13 wins and the floor being about 9, depending on how hard the transitions and defense on offense were going to hit them. It's clear right now that the team is being coached both offensively and defensively to play very high quality football in the wake of some interesting matchups that I do think, even if you want to say were a bit softer, considering they played Tennessee and the Colts team with the losing record, still some good statistical defenses and offenses in that mix that they've handled well. So to me, this season, even though I never thought they would be bad, I did think that this team was going to be one that had to prove that they could still be a contender. And so anything they do that gives me any kind of, I guess, affirmation that they can be is house money. So I'm very comfortable. I'm very pleased. I still think they can be better in a lot of aspects, but to be 8-2 going into a very crucial Kansas City matchup, a team that's 9-0 that seems to win just by every which way they can figure out, it's a lot of fun. It's very nice to see. It's a lot of narratives being quelled, especially when you look at their division. And I'm excited for what lies ahead. Hopefully more good wins on the way.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, or I guess unsurprisingly, my floor was also 9-8. My ceiling was 13-4. So we were in lockstep there. I predicted 11-6, and I had to pull up my preview on Buffalo Bills on SI.
I think I had the same one, by the way. I think 11-2 is what I realistically expected, which still could happen,
Yeah, it for sure. I think at being at 8-2 right now, to hit 11 wins, they need to go 3-4 down the stretch, which I think is more than doable. Though they do play some really good teams, right? We have the Chiefs, we have the 49ers, we have the Lions, we also have the Rams. You get the Patriots twice, and you get the Jets again, whose season's all but over. The thing to me that's the most exciting right now is the fact that Buffalo now sitting at 8-2, with the rest of the division only having 3 wins at most, sets the Bills up to clinch the division early, as long as they don't completely collapse. And in doing that, you get a bye week. I think that's one thing that can't be overstated enough. That's what the Chiefs got last year. They clinched the division early. They weren't going to be the 1 seed. So in week 18, they got a pseudo bye. It allowed them to get healthy. It allowed them to get fresh going into the playoffs. Buffalo is going to have that same opportunity. So I will probably talk about it a little bit later, the Chiefs game, but going into that game, I don't think it's a must win. There's probably some fans that think it's a must win. Buffalo losing that game going into the bye 8-3, it's not a disaster by any means. I think this team is in a really, really good spot, obviously, at 8-2.
Yeah. It's definitely a game that I think you don't want to lose it because it's Kansas City, and you don't want to have any sour grapes or bad memories from the divisional round. So beating them and being 9-2 with the chance for the 1 seed would be exceptional. But I said this too. I think that Colts win was big because you wanted to lock down another AFC win before you got to Kansas City, where even though you don't want to particularly lose this game, no one wants to lose this game. 8-3 is a very palatable record. You
Mm.
also get the week to get healthy. You'll eventually get Keon back. You'll get someone that we're going to talk about very soon back. And I still think that this team can be better, both roster personnel and also how their play calling is going. So yeah, it's a game that I want to win. Won't, hang myself if they lose, but very excited to see what that matchup looks like.
Yeah, and you just alluded to where we're going next with this conversation. Matt Milano, his 21-day practice window was open today. It's already been announced that he will not play against the Kansas City Chiefs. In my head, what that essentially means is he's not going to play that game. The bye is the following week. He's coming back to play against San Francisco following the bye. Matt Milano coming back. Your initial thoughts when you saw the window was opened today?
Joy, excitement, grandeur. Every adjective to describe happiness. Just such an integral part of this team, especially defensively, that I think, at this point in time, when you're seeing how comfortable Dorian Williams has gotten in his role, to know that you're getting that all pro back, but also the fact that you don't have to work him in too quickly because you don't have to. That's really nice. But I just think, again, what he can do for this defense and just his individual role and as a whole is so vital when you talk about some of these more difficult teams you're going to play. The teams that have really good running backs and good run schemes and good concepts, teams that are going to try and work the middle of the field. Pairing him and Bernard together, a duo that we saw very briefly be incredibly effective before the Jacksonville game, to now have that back and to hopefully have Milano, who's now more than a year removed from his leg injury. So now it's really just a matter of getting used to game speed again. I'm beyond excited for it. I think the presence of him, when you talk about blitzing and the pass rush the Bills can have, is immensely valuable, but also him in coverage and what he can do in coverage and how he can kind of benefit the Bills, especially with Teron Johnson on the field. And, talking about if the Bills do decide to run a little bit more 4-3 against some of those more physical run heavy teams like Detroit, like San Francisco, I think he aids with that too, because then if you do have to end up in a situation where Johnson is off the field, I feel very comfortable with a 4-3 that involves Milano and Williams paired with Bernard to potentially seal the edges for run D. So I'm so excited to have him back. I hope he's effective right away. I would say be a little bit cautious of your expectations for him right away as far as percentage of the total snaps, just because he hasn't played. But I don't think that's something that, even if they do that, is going to be very long-lived. I think as time goes on, he's going to start catching up. He's going to start getting more work in, and he's going to be an effective part, assuming that he's properly healed from that leg injury.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest parts about bringing him back too is that Buffalo doesn't need to constantly do this switch between nickel and dime. Nickel obviously being their base. Like we'll talk about Teron Johnson in a little bit, just because he's so freaking good at football. You don't take Teron Johnson off the field. I can't stress that enough. In whatever way possible, you keep him on the field. But with Dorian Williams' limitations against the pass, Buffalo essentially goes dime and they put Cam Lewis on the field along with Terrell Bernard in obvious passing downs. You don't have to do that anymore with Matt Milano. You have Matt Milano on the field. He's a better pass cover than Cam Lewis, and he's a better run stuffer than Dorian Williams. So you essentially upgrade against both the run and the pass with a single player, assuming he's back and healthy, and leg injury, arm injury, and he's been banged up all throughout the past few years here. So there is some concern there, but 70% of Matt Milano, he's one of those rare players in the NFL who I term a game wrecker. Like he can single-handedly change a game for the Buffalo Bills. So adding him to the field with a defense that is playing, I think, above a lot of people's expectations right now is a really exciting proposition, especially at the end of the season here. Like as we're going into the final stretch, going into the playoffs, the concept that Buffalo could, and that's a very important word here, could be somewhat healthy going to the playoffs for the first time in a long time, and not only be healthy but be fresh. That's possible as well. Is just really exciting, and Matt Milano is one of the obvious keys to all of that. Staying on the topic of linebackers, though, there was other news today, and though it's not directly related to the Bills, it is related to a player that was once on the Bills and was a linebacker as well. Tyrell Dodson was cut by the Seattle Seahawks today. He has to go through waivers in order to make it to the ability to sign essentially anywhere. So there's some interest to see if he actually gets picked up and signed to a 53 right away. Your thoughts on if there's any chance Buffalo has a reunion with Tyrell Dodson?
I think there's a chance. The Bills org loves their former players, evidently by the two men they just brought in Jordan
Yeah.
Phillips and Quentin Jefferson. They're always open to the idea of alumni returning to be effective, even if it's just in a depth role. I think the chances, if Balin Spector wasn't injured, and I don't think they'd play the same role, but really just for the roster spot itself, I think would be lower just because it seems like they have the room fortified. But now with Spector being on IR and Matt Milano not returning immediately, I do think there is a possibility, given the fact that Seattle owes him, I believe, $4 million. So there's not an expensive signing in the works here, that you could just get him back for security. Do I think his role would be as big as last year's? Probably not, because he hasn't, even though he knows the scheme, he hasn't been playing with it. And again, Dorian Williams has done a nice job, not all world or anything, but good enough in his role where I don't think he gets unseated by anyone who isn't Matt Milano. But I feel like with the injuries you've seen to the linebacker room throughout the year, the opportunity to always have a presence there that can switch over to green dot if there's break glass in case of emergency, and you don't want that, but someone who has that experience, I'm for it. I think it's fine. I could absolutely see a situation where maybe he comes in to help, whether it's in the linebacking core, whether it's in special teams to start, again, small percentage of the snaps. But I don't see the harm in doing it for a cheap price. And I think anything you could do to have depth that's familiar with your scheme, good in run defense, not going to be asked to cover because you'll eventually have Milano back or Williams to do that, even if Williams isn't the best in coverage. I do think he's better than Dotson in that role. So I'm all for it. I'd like to bring him back. And, Dotson had a good year last year, despite the many memes that came out, including my very own about the PFF rank Madden one. I do think there would be a place for him, and I'd be fine with it. So yeah, bring him back if you can for cheap.
Yeah, it's on that quick topic of PFF. What Joe's alluding to is that Dotson was ranked. I believe he was the number one linebacker at one point at the end of the season.
He was at the end of the year. Yeah.
Yeah. The funniest part about it to me is if you go look at it now, they very, very quietly changed their ratings to assure that Fred Warner was above him. So they did realize that Tyrell Dodson is not better than Fred Warner, at least. So they had to make that change there. But you made one really good point that I think is important in this whole discussion about Tyrell Dodson. He's not going to unseat Dorian Williams. He's not going to unseat Terrell Bernard. And to some extent, like when Matt Milano comes back, he's obviously not going to unseat him. So you'd be signing him as a fourth linebacker. When it comes to Tyrell Dodson, it takes two to tango here, right? Like Dodson, if the Bills didn't claim him, so he makes it through to free agency, Dodson also has to agree to come to Buffalo. And I don't think he wants to go somewhere where he's a fourth string linebacker, as opposed to going somewhere where he can actually play. And I think that that's really important with Tyrell Dodson. I do think the Bills would want him back just as another emergency linebacker that they could throw out there, so they don't have to go through this whole idea of like, oh, you had to play a Balin Spector, maybe you have to play a Nicholas Moreau. Like if you have Dodson, you should be okay in a limited capacity. But it'll be interesting to see. I wouldn't be stunned if he comes back to Buffalo. It wouldn't stun me if he goes and signs with somebody like the New York Giants, for instance.
Right.
Cool. All right. I figure let's just dive right into this Bills Colts game. Buffalo winning it 30-20, and it wasn't really that close. 30-13 in reality. There was a late touchdown from Joe Flacco to Alec Pierce that made it a 10-point game, really a 17-point win. And it was a really weird game. I think that's where I kind of want to start. Like the Bills hop out to this 10-0 lead. Teron Johnson with the interception on the first play, or the first, I think, throw of the game by Joe Flacco. The Bills have a 2-score lead, and then all of a sudden the Colts just come marching back, and they're suddenly up 13-10. And it's like, what's going on with the offense? The defense can't stop the run. And then Buffalo gets into halftime with a lead. I think they're up 20-13 at half. And then the second half, as the Bills do, they just trounce the Colts. And it's so frustrating to some extent that Buffalo is so good in the second half, like dominantly good, and they just aren't in the first half. So starting there, your thoughts, I guess, on the game flow of the game and your perception of the second half wonder and the first half struggles for the Buffalo Bills.
So it's a road game. Indianapolis, to me, was a team that, again, you look at their record and you look at Joe Flacco and you kind of scoff and think they're not really that much of a threat. But I think defensively, the Colts posed a problem for the Bills, both in how the Bills like to take advantage of defenses and also their situation with their injuries. So you have a limping offense that doesn't have Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman. So you have to lean on your run even more so and getting creative with play action. Also with the mindset that next week is Kansas City. And even though you don't particularly pull your punches, you're not trying to show your whole hand either. So you almost feel like they were going to go into this game a little bit limited in what they could physically do. And for the Colts, the strength of their defense is in their front seven. They have some phenomenal talent in that front seven. You know, you could talk about DeForest Buckner. You could talk about Kwity Paye. You could talk about the up-and-coming rookie, you know, Leatu Latu, who I love. So many different talents, EJ Speed, Zaire Franklin. It's just such a loaded, good unit. Kenny Moore, who's phenomenal and seems to be Josh Allen's kryptonite. So I kind of expected an ugly game. I expected an ugly offensive game. Beyond even if the injuries weren't there and you had these guys, because what they were doing was the Colts were manning up the Bills, kind of akin to what Houston was able to do and what Baltimore was able to do. But now with the injuries and plus the pressure they could do with 4-man rushes, it was creating problems for the Bills. And I think that threw Josh off his comfort levels a little bit, and you saw him begin to press. And, you know, defensively, Eric pointed this out, and it's a great point, but this is a team that really does get you to try and show your hand, and they try to get you to kind of give them an idea of what they're working with because they have enough faith in their offense being productive that they can kind of match you eventually and figure it out and get into better positions, which is what I think the Bills did over the course of this game. You know, you look at the second half and they hold Jonathan Taylor to, I believe it was 6 yards rushing on, I think it was 7 carries. So it's a night and day difference. And I do understand frustration about the first half woes, because the idea is that when you play a team like the Colts and you play a team like the Titans and you play, even though I think their offense was really good that day, a Dolphins, and you see the team kind of start slowly, you are always looking over your shoulder and thinking, oh no, what's going to happen when they play the Chiefs? What's going to happen when they play the Ravens? As evidently the Ravens did have an experience like that where they started slow and never could recover. Granted, again, I thought they were going to come back until the trick play from hell, Joe Brady. I haven't forgiven you yet. So, like, it's frustrating, but also I like the idea of this being a second half team. And I like the idea of a team that can tangibly make adjustments and be able to bear down on what you're good at and take it away from you. Because ultimately, when you get so dependent on that working and it takes you out of your rhythm because the team has bared down on it and you're pivoting to maybe more true pass downs, which is what the Bills' strength is defensively, that to me is okay. That to me I can forgive. But on the offensive side of the ball, again, they were dealt a bad hand with the injuries. They were dealt a bad hand with, you know, some of the deficiencies stemming from their O-line just not having the most consistent game. I won't call it bad. Josh Allen not having the most consistent game. I won't call it bad. The rushing game needing a lot of reps to eventually get going. It was a, ugly game, and they won it by almost 17 until a garbage time touchdown. So look, again, I didn't want to call it a trap game as much as I thought the Bills were just going to win one of those like clunkers where they just look like crap, but pull it away kind of like they did in 2022. And I'm okay with it. A win's a win. Crucial AFC win. Your whole division outside of Miami, who could potentially do this, lost. And I think, you get another step closer to winning your division, and we'll see what they do against the Chiefs and if it looks any different in the first half. Because I do think Joe Brady, I don't want to say, again, pulling his punches, but it did look like there was reps left in reserve for maybe an opponent they knew was coming.
Yeah, I do believe that to some extent, that Buffalo seems to be coasting at this point, right? It seems to be like, we can go vanilla. We're good enough to win vanilla. We don't have to really show everything. We'll sprinkle in some weird things here and there, but we're not going to expose all of our tricks of the trade here before big contests against a team like the Kansas City Chiefs or the playoffs for that matter. So I do think to some extent, I still do get frustrated at points with this offense just because it's like, what are we doing here? Just be better because you can be better. That being said, against a team like the Colts, I think so. One thing, when I was doing my research on them heading into this game, the one thing I noticed was that statistically they weren't a great defense, but I had watched them play Minnesota last week and they were really good and they were really aggressive. And the thing I kept saying to myself is, well, why is that? Why are they statistically so bad, But again, in that game, they were so good. And then early in the Bills game, they were really, really good. And what I came to find was essentially injuries have decimated them in some key spots. DeForest Buckner missed 5 games. Kenny Moore missed 2 games. Kwity Paye missed 2 games. You have a bunch of other players sprinkled here and there that have missed games. And suddenly you can kind of put all the pieces together and say, like, the defense really isn't as bad as they statistically show out to be, especially when they have their guys on the field. And Kenny Moore and Taron Johnson, those two, like, up there with Trent McDuffie as the best nickel corners in the NFL. Kenny, which was the coolest part of this game, honestly, was Kenny. It was the Kenny Moore and Taron Johnson show. Like, who could outdo who? When you add Kenny Moore back to the field and he's healthy, that team's way better. When you add DeForest Buckner to the field, that team is so much freaking better. And the Bills got the Colts at the exact wrong time when their defense was really, really healthy. And the Bills offense, meanwhile, was missing 2 of their key wide receivers that give Buffalo the ability to do a little bit more to the defense. I think all in all, the Bills offense was decent. Obviously would like to see them be a little bit better, but at the same time, you put up 23 points, add the 7 that the defense put up, and like, there's teams like the Jets who can't put up 23 points no matter what they do, and the Bills do it on a bad day. So all in all, I think from an offensive perspective, it was a solid one, albeit not a perfect one. But Buffalo doesn't need to be perfect to win football games, which I think is a perfect example if we look at Josh Allen. Like, he wasn't perfect yesterday. The 2 picks were not good. The one was a great play by Kenny Moore, but still one, like, Josh, come on, don't try to throw it all the way to that side of the field. The first pick was bad, though. So Josh Allen, not great. Thoughts on him? Thoughts on his game overall?
Inconsistent. I won't call it a bad game. I thought Josh had a few throws where I was like, oh, damn, like, okay, like this is a pro level throw. A couple examples, the beautiful fade to Dawson Knox. I think that was a 30 or 40 yard pass, perfectly thrown over the shoulder. Love that. He had a clean pocket and just took advantage of it. The before half throw to Mac Hollins was exceptional. On the run, I'll forgive him because it wasn't perfectly thrown, but it got to Hollins and he took advantage and extended the play. There was a really, really nice throw to Khalil Shakir in between 3 defenders in zone that I loved. He wasn't perfect, but again, circumstances have to be taken into account. I think the first interception, when I watched it, I looked at it as that's just Josh Allen arm arrogance, for someone that hasn't had an insane amount of turnovers this year. I think he thought that he could put that ball over EJ's speed and get it to Shakir, which, by the way, like, maybe 2 inches on that ball, he does. He just threw it on a line and not with enough arc to get it over the linebacker. And EJ Speed, if you watch, fully extends for that ball. It's still high. So it was a really nice play by him. It looked worse on the broadcast angle. I still think he shouldn't have thrown it because he had a James Cook check down that probably gets you 10 yards on that play. And he should have just been a little more conservative. Gabe's script, it's 10-10 at the time. So he's probably feeling the need to do too much. And that happens. So that was the one. The other interception, Kenny Moore, just like, he baited him, man. He baited him so hard. The play action, the boot to the right, Samuel sitting in his spot. Moore probably was licking his lips. And the fact that it wasn't a pick six, I thank whatever deity interfered with that, because I thought for sure the game was tied after that throw. Could not believe he fell down. So thank you, Kenny. We appreciate you not hurting us outside of the pick. But all in all, I thought it was a fine game. Not his best, not his sharpest, not his worst. I've seen way worse games from Josh in his career, even this season in the Texans game. I do think that, again, the problem that, I've had Anthony point out on my show, that Eric has pointed out in the film room with those guys, is really just, with these top 2 wideouts gone or not healthy, when teams man the Bills up, they can have success. And I saw it in multiple reps, specifically the red zone drive where they had to settle for 3, or actually, no, I think it was they went for the 4th down and didn't convert. But there was a play where Josh just drops back and he's got nothing. And those 4-man rushes with that really talented Colts D-line hurts. So, if teams really throw that at the Bills, my question for Joe Brady when they get into a really tough matchup like this week, or, ideally in the playoffs, is what are your pivots and how do you create separation with your play calling? And it's kind of why I keep going back to it felt vanilla, because, like, it didn't feel like he was really doing too much creatively, both in run concepts and pass concepts, for me to say, like, this is the best game he's ever called, or he's showing so much here. So, like, for Josh, it wasn't his best game, but not his best game is still over 300 yards of total offense. It's still a rushing touchdown, and it's still high-level plays and high throws and key moments to elevate the Bills to a win, and I can't be mad at that. So do I want more from him? Of course. Do I expect more? Yes. And do I think it'll happen? Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said there at the end, like the receiver issues were pretty apparent in this game without Coleman and without Cooper. The Bills really only had Khalil Shakir you can rely on. Matt Collins, we know what Matt Collins is as a player, and yet he somehow shows up for the Bills in some pretty key
Yeah.
spots.
Wait, Uber,
He's
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Can I interfere real fast just to
yeah,
give Mac Collins his flowers? I'm
yeah,
so
go.
sorry. I got to give so much props to the guy. We signed him to be basically wide receiver 4, maybe even 5 in the eyes of some. He was a 1-year depth signing, a 30-year-old wide receiver who only really good year was with Vegas. And yet he's been so good in his role. And I want to stress in his role. I do not think Mac
Yeah.
Collins is wide receiver 1. He's been a really nice target for Josh. They very clearly have rhythm. He trusts him downfield. His run blocking is a plus, and he's been a great presence and kindled a bunch of really nice plays yesterday. So I just want to give credit to Matt Collins because, like, for a 1-year dev signing, I'm all in on bringing this guy back next year to fill out the room, and I'm very pleased with it. And I apologize, Uber. I had to give him his flowers before I forgot. Please continue.
Yo, you're spot on with Matt Collins. Like when the Bills signed him, what I looked at him at was a better version of Jake Kumaro. So he's a special teams player. Like that, his job is to play special teams. That's his role in the Buffalo Bills. But because of injuries and because of his ability as a blocker, the Bills have essentially said, we need to play you more than probably they even expected. And he's been good. Like he hasn't been great. He hasn't been awful. Like I guess good to average is probably where I'd put him. But that's better than I think anyone thought he would be. I think a lot of people were soured from the Ravens and the Texans game where he wasn't particularly good, but like the Bills were just screwed in both of those games because they had literally no one else to throw the ball to.
He was
With Khalil
open in that
Shakir.
Texans game, by the way.
He was
open for a touchdown. He would have had like a 50-yard touchdown or like a 40-yard touchdown, and his numbers would have looked fine, and it would have changed a lot of perceptions.
Yeah, but yesterday 86 yards, which going back to like what he was signed for, if you had told me coming into the season that there would be a game where Matt Collins had 86 yards, I would have been like, I don't really love the sound of that just because that means something else is going on. But he was a key to Buffalo's victory yesterday, and he, outside of Khalil Shakir, was really the only other player that Josh could really lean on and say like, oh, I know I can get that guy the ball. But going back to your topic of what is Joe Brady going to do when they're in the spot like they are against a better team, they have to pivot somewhere. I'll say one thing I'm really excited about for a negative reason, I think. I'm excited to see more Dawson Knox. And I think a lot of Bills fans are going to think that that is crazy. Obviously want Dalton Kincaid to be healthy. I tweeted this out yesterday. I tweeted out that, and this is a bit of a hot take, I think that Dawson Knox might be better in this offense than Dalton Kincaid is. And the reason I said that isn't because I view Dawson Knox as a better receiving tight end than Dalton Kincaid. It's because I view him as a significantly better blocking tight end. And because he can block, you can disguise so many more things with him. When you put Dalton Kincaid on the field, if you're going to put him out to block somebody, he's not going to be able to do it. So essentially, you don't have to worry about him. You're playing 11 on 10 in those rundowns, or when he's going out the pass, you show your cards to some extent. With Dawson Knox, it's like he could do anything. He isn't great as a receiver, though he's better than a lot of people give him credit for, and he's a really, really good blocker. So I'm excited to see Dawson Knox. I think that could be where one of their pivots is. That being said, they need Amari Cooper. They need Keon Coleman. Like those two going into the playoffs are a key to this team because you're not going to beat a team in January like the Chiefs, like the Ravens, probably like the Texans even, if your number one wide receiver is Khalil Shakir and your number 2 is Matt Collins, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough ask. It's a tough situation to be in. They need to be able to beat man coverage because that's what the teams are going to do to them. If they can't separate, they're not going to be able to have much success in the air unless, someone wins or they just extend a play enough for Josh to find someone who, eventually gets open on a vacated route. So that's something I'm interested to watch. But I do got to say, that game, and I think RJ brought up a comment here where he said it looks super rough. It's so difficult. Like, I get this because, the guy you brought in to beat man coverage one-on-one isn't here. The best contested catch guy on your team isn't there right now. So this game is also odd to evaluate because you can look at it and definitely see some deficiencies, but how much different does it look if they have to man up Amari Cooper and all of a sudden things open up for your other receivers? Or how different does it look if you could throw a 50-50 go ball to Keon Coleman or just one like fade in the red zone and see what happens because he can win those. So it is what it is, man. Like it's tough to have Mac be one. I honestly thought Curtis Samuel was fine in this
Yep.
game. I also want to point that out. I think Curtis Samuel has become demon spawn of this fan base the same way DeMar Hamlin has. He's basically the offense's DeMar Hamlin right now. I, he played a good game. Like, I'm going to say it. He played a good game. He wasn't perfect. He didn't win every route. He's not someone who can do that consistently, especially against man. But there were times where he was wide ass open for Josh Allen down the field, or he made consistent plays, when he caught balls out of the flat. Obviously, the interception was to him. That's Josh's fault more than I blame Curtis Samuel. And Curtis laid out a few really nice blocks in this game, including on the final drive, multiple times for the Josh Allen run that got him a first down and the Khalil Shakir screen. So you guys have demonized Curtis Samuel, and I get it. And he's been hurt, and it hasn't been what you lived up to be. He was not bad. He was not bad in this game, and I will defend him because sometimes I feel like people want to kill this man, and he doesn't deserve to be killed. You just want a little more production, which I think he can give you when they get healthy.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good call too. Like Curtis Samuel's game yesterday, I think is an exciting one as a Bills fan because when everyone is healthy, which clearly they are not right now, but when you bring Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper back, who they will get at some point this season, if you add a Curtis Samuel who's starting to do a little bit to that with a Matt Collins, with a Khalil Shakir, with a Dalton Kincaid, with a Dawson Knox, with a James Cook, with a Ray Day, like now you have this plethora of weapons that are all capable of producing. I'm let down by Curtis Samuel this season. I expected a big season from him in Buffalo. He hasn't lived up to it. I do think that injury played a role in it. I think it was turf toe or some diagnosis of turf toe, which he's probably not even fully recovered from because you don't particularly recover from that in season. But if you can get a little bit out of Samuel every game to go along with all these other pass catchers, you make this offense, which is already dangerous in its current state of just constant injury, they become more dangerous if a player like Curtis Samuel is producing. And at least we saw the start of that yesterday. We saw the start of something where it's like, okay, we can kind of get what's happening here. We can see him in the flats. We can see a little bit of ability. I want to get that speed going. Let's see him downfield and go for a deep ball on with him. I don't know if we will see that though because of the injury. And there's some concerns with their offensive line now too, which is a whole nother thing. But all in all, yesterday, the passing game, I don't think it was great, but I think the stats, especially the 2 interceptions, mask how good it actually was. It looks way worse than it actually was on the field.
Yeah, given the circumstances, for sure.
Last part about the offense, and then we'll hop over to the defense. And I just put this in the show notes. Complimentary football. James Cook went for 19 carries, 80 rushing yards, and obviously the touchdown to seal it there at the end, which Josh celebrated literally before James Cook broke the tackle box.
Yeah.
I think that this complimentary football, though, is so important, and Josh was a key to that, too. 50 rushing yards was a big deal, too. So in total, the Bills had 135 rushing yards. That's something that this Bills team leans on this season, and it's also something every good team in the NFL leans on. If you watch a Chiefs game, if you watch a Ravens game, if you watch a Bills game, they're a run-first offense that can go to the passing offense when they need to because they have elite quarterbacks. So just calling out in particular that the Bills' run game has been effective, and it was effective in this game.
Yeah, and again, I don't think they did anything too crazy in their running game. I know when we were in the game day chat yesterday, Greg, I remember made like this comment about how like I'd like to see more outside runs, and then the touchdown, which I don't know if this was by design or if it was literally just the look they got, but Cook literally to one just quick cut, and as soon as like you pointed out, Allen saw the angle, it was it. Like there's no one catching up to him at that spot, and it didn't feel like they were doing anything too crazy. I saw duo, I saw some zone running, and it was just like push it down the field and let's see what we can get. A couple of chunk plays, a couple of nice blocks. I know the duo run, I think, got them like 10 yards or something like that. Cook made a really nice improvised play where he was supposed to come down and then he bounced off a tackle and got an extra 10 yards. It wasn't the most consistent rushing day, but they got their runs off when they needed to. And I think that's the important thing when you talk about this Bills rushing attack. It can be effective even when it's not consistent. And that threat of them being able to get the big run, whether it's from Josh, whether it's from James Cook, whether it's from Ray Davis, again, that's going to change a lot, especially when we get to the cold months, when you get to potentially the playoffs, because if teams are just fearing and respecting your rushing attack and know that you're a team that's willing to fake the ball if you have to, it's just going to do wonders for a team that might have to beat those man looks and try to find ways to get separation if they're not doing it holistically. So I loved it. And in this game, the fact that it wasn't anything earth-shatteringly different than what they usually do, maybe some wrinkles here or there, to still have success, to still get James Cook his rushing touchdown, to see Josh get that, I think it was 20-yarder. It was fun. I got to give credit to the Colts rushing defense. I know the numbers don't look pretty. I thought they played a really nice game. I thought the Colts defensive line was giving the O-line a lot of fits in the rushing attack. A few times where, like, especially midway through the game before kind of the wheels fell off a little bit just from too much pressure, that D-line was just getting backfield penetration, creating problems on the play action passes they were trying to run, and just doing a good job of getting through to stop Cook and really get them from anything explosive. So pleased with it. Thought, you just met a match in the defense, but I'm excited for what this rushing attack can look like in the cold months when you play some really good teams ahead, because I think that's going to keep you in every single game you play.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, the weather's about to get bad, and we know Buffalo is going to play in a bad weather game at some point, just because we seemingly do every year. The ability to lean on the run game is paramount for this team to have continued success going to the playoffs, and they seemingly have the talent to do it this year. Any other comments on the offense before we hop over to the defense?
Be nice to Curtis Samuel, people. He's doing his best out there. And you brought up the turf toe. Like, I said this, I think, last week. I've said it to people. Like, when I saw he had that injury over the summer, I was like, fuck, because I thought, like, this is going to linger. Like, even if it's minor, you might see him slow down. And now, like, he starts week 1, and I'm thinking, like, okay, so he's playing. Maybe it wasn't that bad. But, like, the weeks of sample size, they just tell me, like, he was not 100% right. If you watch him, he was not 100% right. And I think a mixture of that paired with the fan perception that he's doing nothing, but he was getting open at times, led to the negative attitude towards him. Be nice to Curtis Samuel, man. I think he's doing fine. It sucks that it didn't pan out with the injury so far. I don't think that means he can't do anything for you going forward. And, like, turf toe sucks from all accounts. I have never suffered it. I'm not going to pretend like I have, but every person who has had it and every person who describes it with the same theme. It sucks. And it's probably extremely difficult for a receiver like him to play through it. So be nice to Curtis Samuel, guys. Be nice.
Yeah.
Just be nice. He's doing fine.
And not that I'm not a doctor by any means, but I did have to Google turf toe at one point in my life because I was like, turf toe, that sounds like a funny, silly injury. Like, that can't be too bad. And it's literally a ligament sprain or tear of the ligament in your big toe. And your big toe is essentially the one you use for all your balancing, and you use it to kind of push off and stuff like that. So when you have an injury as a wide receiver with turf toe, and that, just like Spin said here, it lingers. Like, you need to rest it or you need to get surgery on it. And Curtis Samuel hasn't had the time to do that this year. So to some extent, he's going to deal with it all year. There is some hope and some optimism because he's not going anywhere next year either. His contract kind of disallows that from happening. But there's some hope that next year, in next season, the Curtis Samuel we all expected this year actually shows up. So there's some hope that we could be even better next year. Not that really helps the 2024 Bills right now.
Yeah.
All right, hopping over to the defense, I'm going to start with the one guy that I think is an absolute superstar, and I think every Bills fan knows it. I think the rest of the NFL is getting to know it, and that's Teron Johnson, who's freaking phenomenal. The pick six at the start of the game was one thing, but he was all over the field. He almost had a second pick six. He had the sack. He's probably going to win Defensive Player of the Week just because that's essentially how these stats work out. He had 3 solo tackles. He's amongst the best defensive players in the NFL at this point. I think you probably put him in, say, the top 50 defensive players in the league. And like I said earlier, it's him, Trent McDuffie, and Kenny Moore for best nickel corner in the NFL. There's no one else close to them. So just thoughts on Teron Johnson in general, this game or this season in totality.
Yeah, he's just vital to this defense. I think when he got hurt, it was a big blow, and they tried compensating as much as they could. But once they faced the team where you really needed just top nickel corner play, they just fell apart. And it's not a knock on Cam Lewis as much as this is an all-pro who's inherited that position. And what the defense can do in their nickel when they have him is just different than what you could do in nickel when you have Cam. And you saw, like, some of those 4-3 pivots they had were because Cam Lewis simply wasn't effective enough in the role, and maybe they wanted to try some things out to be a little more physical, because Teron Johnson, despite being a nickel corner and despite still, every now and then getting an unfavorable matchup, basically plays like a linebacker. So he's so important to have on the field. And just seeing, that pick six, and what he described was, I seen this play and I made the adjustment because I figured they were going to run it. And then that's exactly what he did. It's awesome. He's such a big part of this. I'm really encouraged by the fact that he's played a few weeks and seems to be continuing to get better every single week. And what this defense could do with the comfort of having Johnson there is just absolutely big. So I love it. I love the play. I love what we've had this year. I'm excited for, the day you get Matt Milano back, and ideally you're able to run that nickel at full health for the first time in almost 2 years with Matt Milano with Terrell Bernard, with Teron Johnson, backing up that 4-man front. I think what you could do, the multiplicity of it, both in pass rush and in coverage, is huge. Very excited. Great game from him. I hope he does it again this week and every week going forward.
Yeah, the funny thing with Teron Johnson, for me at least, is that we have to describe him as a nickel corner because that's what he is. He is the fifth defensive back for the Buffalo Bills, who obviously have the 2 outside and the 2 safeties deep. But like, I feel like when you describe somebody as a nickel corner, it takes away from their abilities to some extent. You're like, oh, he's the extra player. The NFL does need to adjust to some extent. Like we refer to nickel as one personnel grouping, and then we have base, which to me, base implies that that's the one you use the most. But base being your 4-3 or 3-4, usually without your nickel corner on the field. The Bills' base is nickel. The majority of the NFL's base is nickel. Base is nickel. Like, I don't understand why we still use this outdated terminology. Like, it should be updated at some point, but that's my own little rant about verbiage of base versus nickel. Teron Johnson is phenomenal. He's essentially the Bills' third linebacker, to a point where if you go to Pro Football Reference, which is where I go to look at all my stats just because they do a really good job of kind of breaking them down into tables that work for my brain. If you go there, though, in 2021 and 2022, they actually have him listed as a linebacker, not a cornerback, because he essentially plays linebacker.
Yeah.
He's under 6 feet. He's under 200 pounds, yet he plays like a player that's 6'3", 240 pounds. He's phenomenal against the run. He's obviously great against the pass. He is a game changer for the Bills. And if you go back and you look at those Ravens game and the Texans game where he wasn't on the field, it's like the team is completely different without Teron Johnson. And having him back and having him be healthy for as long as we can possibly keep him healthy is going to be extremely important for the Buffalo Bills. Arguably more important than getting Amari Cooper back or getting Keon Coleman back. Like, he is the, I guess, spoon that stirs the pot to some extent. Mm-hmm. And then adding Matt Milano in the future is just makes that second level. A second level with Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, and Teron Johnson is so freakishly good, and we've yet to see it consistently. I cannot wait for that. And if it doesn't happen, like, somebody needs to like do a seance or something, because like the football gods somehow despise the Bills. Like, we need those 3 on the field. It would be a blast to watch.
Agreed.
Outside of that, the one thing negative that I do want to bring up, the interior defensive tackles to me have been struggling the entire season. That includes Ed Oliver, that includes Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, who somebody did allude to this or brought this up. That Austin Johnson is leading the Buffalo Bills in interceptions with 2 of them. But I do want a little bit more out of my defensive tackle outside of interceptions. Thoughts on the interior of the Bills defensive line and what the Bills can do to kind of make that work? Or if you think it's working, I guess, let me in on the secret.
No, I don't got a secret for you. I just think it's funny that as soon as we started saying defense, this comment came up. You know damn well that he was so excited to talk about that pick, and I don't blame him. 2 interceptions for Austin Johnson was not on my bingo card, and I think it's absolutely hilarious that he somehow pulled that off. And both of them looked like almost identical to each other, just this random, like, right place, right time ass catch that, like, hey, I compliment your hands, Austin Johnson. You have, what is it? He has the same amount of picks as Sauce Gardner. Is that what it is?
In his career, yeah.
Oh my God. So anyways, it's a problem. I wouldn't call it like it hasn't been great this year. I think what makes it disappointing is Ed Oliver kind of sharing in the struggles with how good he was last year. But I do think in context, Ed was working through a hamstring issue. The hamstring issue has hamstrung him to not be 100% in his role. And I think each week he's working to get better. And there are moments in his games over the past few weeks that he is making plays that benefit the team and he is getting pushed. It's just not consistent yet. And it is frustrating because I was the first person, and I always admit, given the circumstances now, I thought this was going to be the strength of the team. I thought it was going to be the deepest unit. I thought they were going to get consistent pass rushing and running defense from their interior because Daquan Jones and Ed looked so good in the start of 23 before Daquan Jones went out. It's clear that they are just not the same quality right now, but I haven't ruled out the fact that it could just get better. But it just doesn't feel like right now they're playing their best ball or that it's consistent enough for me to be comfortable with it. I do think, though, there have been flashes. And the flashes breed me to be encouraged that you might see more consistent push from DaQuan Jones. You might see more consistent push from Ed Oliver. They won't get worked in doubles as frequently. Some of the matchups have affected that too. So it's frustrating, even despite the Austin Johnson interception, that they haven't been playing the highest of caliber constantly, but also I think there are things defensively I'd like to see them do. I talked about it with Anthony last week, just maybe sending different types of blitzes and upping their pressure rates a little bit more with blitzing to try and help this interior D line a little bit, where maybe the threat becomes something that offenses stay a little bit on their toes for. And all of a sudden that uncertainty and maybe the hesitation and the thought that they're bringing extra men leads to more favorable matchups for the DTs, leads to a split second where they could actually get some push. Things like that, I think, can help them. But yeah, I want more out of them, and I think it's fair for the fans to want more out of them. I don't think they're the worst in the league, but they have a higher standard that we've become used to, at the very least with that Oliver, that I think they haven't lived up to.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where my mind is here. Like, I expected so much more from them, and that's a good thought. Like, did I expect them to be the best unit? I actually think I probably thought that the Bills' most complete unit was probably hell. It might have been defensive tackles coming into the season. I did really like the corners though, just because I'm a huge fan of Benford and Razul and Tehran, obviously. But depth wise, their ability to rotate at defensive interior, I expected way more than what I'm seeing this season. And sometimes it can be so frustrating because it's like these gaping holes are just appearing in the middle of our defensive line. And when that happens, it breaks apart everything else. It's one thing to lose contain on the edge occasionally, which the Bills do as well. Sometimes AJ Epinesa will kind of goof that one up a little bit. But you can recover from that when you get destroyed up the middle and you get offensive linemen spilling into the second level and getting to your smaller linebackers or Tehran Johnson, for instance, it makes it incredibly hard to hold teams to under 5 yards of carry, which is precisely why the Bills don't hold people to under 5 yards of carry. But it has to improve. I do think having Matt Milano back at some point, even though Dorian's been pretty good against the run this season, having Milano back just changes the perception of your defense to opposing teams, where they have to be a little bit more cautious on how they block and what schemes are calling against your team. But I need somebody on this defensive line to stand up, and it should be Ed Oliver. Like, it has to be Ed Oliver. And it's so frustrating to see a player like him that just oozes talent. Like, we've seen it. We saw it a lot last year. Like, he was all pro caliber last year. And then I always go back to that Lions game in 2022, I think, that the Bills won at the last second with Allen hitting Diggs on it was just a stinger down the middle. Ed Oliver won that game for the Bills. He was the best player on the football field. And my frustration is always, why does that guy not show up more often? And they need him to. They desperately need him to. Bringing in Quentin Jefferson and Jordan Phillips, I mean, it was fine yesterday. Like, you obviously got the sack from Q. Jordan Phillips is what Jordan Phillips is. Sometimes he just doesn't go full speed, which that was a really weird play with Joe Flacco running to the right side of the field and Jordan Phillips just stopping. I don't really know what he was doing there, but yeah, need to see more from the defensive interior. Austin Johnson, I do think the interception stat is cool that he has 2. I will add this. I did look up, and I haven't been able to fully do this research stat. What's the last defensive tackle to have 3 interceptions? Dude, I don't know if a defensive tackle has had 3 interceptions since before 1960. If Austin Johnson was able to come away with 1 more, he'd be in very, very rare territory. I do see Aiden Hutchinson had 3, I think, his rookie year. But Aiden Hutchinson, obviously a defensive end, not a defensive tackle. It would be so awesome if this week Austin Johnson picked off Patrick Mahomes.
Dude, that stadium would go nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, you might have to put him up on the ring at that point. Like, just put his name up there. I guess staying with the defensive line, just because there was one player at least on the defensive line who it just continues to be great this season. Greg Rousseau, thoughts, opinions, interest in re-signing him to a larger extension.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think he's going to generate top of the market value either because he doesn't put up the sack numbers. But I think it's funny because Greg Rousseau feels like the dirty work end in that he's doing everything he can to be formidable. And he's such a good run defender and he does help generate pressure and he does create issues with passing lanes if you try throwing to his side, and some teams will try to avoid that. And I think he paired with Von Miller has been great, because I think the threat of another true edge rusher that's consistent is going to help him a lot more. I'm very pleased with him. I'm having a lot of fun watching Greg Rousseau. I think he was awesome in this Colts game. That strip sack was huge. And, that's part of the benefit of having an edge rusher with really long arms that can generate those kinds of plays. I'm pleased. I don't think he's the best edge rusher in the league by any stretch. I think there's still more to be done there, but I also think Greg Rousseau was a massive project coming into the NFL, having only started, I think, 2 seasons in college or 1 season in college. Very raw, unrefined player that you bring in because he has insane traits, and each year he gets a little bit better every time. I think this season has probably been or will be his best one, just for the fact that he's staying on the field. First off, because he seemed to have had a nagging injury each year that slows him down. But now that he's staying on the field and he's staying healthy, he's generating consistent play. He's doing well in pass rush productivity. He's causing these havoc plays, and it's breeding results. So I think Greg Rousseau is a very good young edge rusher in this league with room to get even better. I think there's more on the table for him right now, and there are times where I want more from him in a game, but I'm pleased, and I think you should absolutely extend him. He's one of those young players that I think you can absolutely build around. And then if you go out in the draft this year, find another edge rusher, or if you have the cap space to sign someone, I haven't looked at the market and what that's going to look like yet. I think he is a perfect stable presence to build around that could keep a D-line, at least the edge rushing component of it, formidable for years to come.
Yeah, he's still only 24, so that's very, very young considering this is his 4th season in the NFL. Comparing this year to last year for him, last year he had 5 sacks. This year he has 5.5. Last year he had 42 tackles, and this is in 16 games, by the way. Last year, 42 tackles. This year, 37. So he's on pace to surpass that as well. Last year, 12 tackles for a loss. This year, 12 tackles for a loss. And in fact, that 12 tackles for a loss leads the entire NFL. Like, he is a very good player. He's having a much better season this season than he had last year. You'd love to see those sack numbers creep up a little higher. But honestly, he's probably going to get pretty damn close to 10. And if he has double-digit sack season with a tackle for loss total up in the 20s, which is also very possible, he could earn himself a Pro Bowl nod. If not, maybe sneak in as a second-team All-Pro to some extent as a defensive end. I'm with you. I don't think he's never going to be TJ Watt. He's never going to be Myles Garrett or Micah Parsons. Like, that's not the player he is, but he's a player that you can stick on that side, whatever side of the defensive line you want, honestly. And you can trust that he's going to be able to contain the run. He's also going to cause issues to the quarterback, even if it doesn't mean him pressuring the quarterback. His arms are so freaking long. We saw it against Patrick Mahomes a couple of years ago when he got his arms up, tipped the ball up, and caught it. Like, that's what he does, and players, quarterbacks are wary of him. They know he exists, and they know that if you're going to throw the ball in his direction, you better be pretty careful because he can get those paws up and knock them down. Greg Rousseau, I mean, he's been really, really good this year. I think, like you said, he can get better too. So excited for that. Any other thoughts on the defense here before we hop into one quick thing on special teams?
Yeah, no, I mean, the Colts game, they had an ugly start. Jonathan Taylor getting 100 yards in the first half was discouraging. Granted, one came on a very explosive run, and I think they bared down eventually on it. Terrell Bernard is awesome. I love Terrell Bernard. I still stand him, and I think he's just so nice to have as your Mike and your enforcer, and just his intelligence post-snap, his processing are awesome, and he just makes plays, man. And then our corner room, you spoke about it very briefly before, but Benford and Douglas are just a great boundary corner duo, and I'm just so pleased with their play. And I think that that's just a great room to have. And, Douglas is giving them a very interesting proposition when the year ends because he's played well, but he is 30. So it's, do you keep him around? Will he stay another 2 years? Like, this guy's playing high-level corner at the boundary, and I don't know if I want to lose that or have to wonder if, you're ready to give Elam the keys to the kingdom if this guy's healthy and willing to come back for fair money. So, as far as this season's lens, I'm very happy with that room. I'm excited to see next week, going up against D-Hop and going up against Xavier Worthy and what, the defense is going to do to mitigate those threats. But they've played well. I just give flowers to the players I can. And there are two I wanted to shout out exclusively.
Yeah, I'm a very much a big fan of Christian Benford as well as Rasul Douglas. And to some extent, that entire secondary as a whole. And I know that they have their issues. Like, Obviously, every single Bills fan that doesn't want him to start is pointing out that bad angle that Damar Hamlin had on the big Jonathan Taylor run, because we can only point out the negative. We can never point out the positive. But Damar Hamlin's actually been decent at safety, if not good. I'm fine with Damar Hamlin playing safety for the remainder of the year, honestly. And I like Taylor Rapp might be the most underrated player on this defense at this point. Like he hits hard, he defends passes well, he doesn't let big plays go over his head very often. Like I'm actually really liking what I'm seeing from Taylor Rapp, and I don't think he's talked enough. He's talked about enough in Bill circles, let alone the entirety of the NFL. Like we forget how good he's doing, considering he's replacing Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer.
Mm-hmm.
Like Taylor Rapp's been pretty damn good.
Damar Hamlin too, that thing you pointed out, like that was a bad play. That's a knock on him. 100%. Like I don't think he made a great angle, but that was the bad play. And then it was followed by a pretty good pass coverage and better run fits. So like that's the ebb and flow of a game. And also it's a bad angle on Jonathan Taylor. And let's be real, like you match up with him one-on-one. It's very difficult to actually get that favorable matchup. So, like I said, I'll criticize him for things that are fair. I just feel like I said about Curtis Samuel, he gets demonized a little too much for my liking. I think it's just easy to place blame on him for everything when it's harder to, in my eyes, key in on the things that really are his fault and what could be attributed to somebody else.
For sure. With you again, as usual. All right, going to hop over to special teams here. Tyler Bass, scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust him?
I'm going to call it a 6.5 right now because I won't forget about the ugly missed extra points, including one just a couple weeks ago, despite the walk-off win. And I'm not going to forget about some of the uncharacteristic misses that he had over the past maybe year and a half. But what I'll say about this particular position is while it's very easy to succumb to the yips and fall apart, once you get confidence, I think you start rolling, and that builds each and every kick that you make to a point where you just start becoming a little more automatic. I do think, there's a lot of factors that will go into kicking, including who's, your holder, is the snap good, the timing, all of these things. But some of the misses were clearly on Bash, just not having it and being able to put the ball in the spot. But that 61-yarder and the team's continued faith in him, you might have called it, loyalty to a fault, but he made it. And from there, he goes into this game and makes 3 field goals, or I think it was a 2 field goals and an extra point. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he made some pretty big kicks, including the one before halftime. And I have right now confidence that Tyler Bass is feeling confident, and with that can make some big kicks and big moments. Also, despite my concerns, the miss rate wasn't as bad as it felt. It was pretty league average. So it's not like he was the worst kicker in the NFL. He just wasn't the best. He was middle of the pack, and middle of the pack for that position is noticeable because unless you're the best, misses of any kind are going to be a problem, especially with the fan base that just watched you miss the divisional round kick. So yeah, I would say 6.5. I do think I'm a little worried still about him, but past couple of weeks have been good for him, good mentally. And if you can build off that and feel comfortable walking out onto the field in big situations, then I'm going to be okay with it. I'm going to be okay trotting him out there. And I think he's earned the right to get good graces, to get a second chance for locking down his position and being someone that we can look to long-term.
Yeah, and Dirty Jersey puts up this note here that I was going to bring up, that he did drill a 48-yard,
that's what it was.
47 yards extra point, which is a not nothing thing. Like I think also people forget this, that the new extra point is 32 yards, which should be a gimme for NFL kickers, but still it's 32 yards nonetheless. And then when you have a 15-yard penalty, it becomes significantly longer. Yet Tyler Bass still drilled that. To me, that's just as exciting, though points-wise it isn't. But from a confidence perspective in Tyler Bass, it's just exciting to see him hit a long extra point like that, as it is a long field goal. And he also hit a 47-yard field goal yesterday too. So you're starting to see him kind of build up this swagger a little bit. The 61-yarder obviously was phenomenal for him, but that could be a turning point in this young guy's career, which is so wild that just a one kick against the Miami Dolphins could change the way that you perceive your own abilities. And we're seeing him. The other thing yesterday is when he kicked, they were all damn good. Like he was striking them all, putting them down the middle. It wasn't
no doubt on any.
Is this not going to go?
Right.
6.5 probably where I'm still at too, just because, especially like playing the Chiefs this week, is it going to be in his head a little bit that that was the team I missed against? Interested to see how he performs moving forward.
And being on your show in spirit of your absolute passion and love for trolling the AFC East, wouldn't it be absolutely hilarious if Tyler Bass has the most the most insane redemption arc because of the Miami Dolphins in an insanely improbable field goal try that I did not think he was going to make, and all of a sudden his career turns around? But I just wanted to say too, like with Tyler Bass, like, you can, again, I could say loyalty to a fault for a lot of things in this tenure of this regime, but really, like, look at how amped up and genuine the response was to Tyler Bass hitting that walk-off, and look at the locker room celebration, and look at Tyler Bass's reaction, and just like that to me is something that I just love about the org. And you could call me a cheerleader, whatever, but just seeing how it's never this like sense of dread or sense of like the wheels are falling off. They did bring in kickers in to compete because you had to at that point, right? Yeah. His confidence was reeling. You saw glaring issues. It's a business. I get that. But you could tell they didn't want to, and they gave him the nod over the kicker they bring in. Then he makes that clutch field goal. Then you see everyone cheer and pick him up and get hyped. And then you see the coach emotional, and then you see him get emotional. Like, I love the camaraderie, whatever the word is. I always mess that word up from this organization. I love seeing the brotherhood that happens with this kind of situation where a guy is kind of reeling mentally, and all they're trying to do is pick him up to help him find the best version of himself. Like, for a kicker, for them, for all that mental energy that they're putting in to make sure that he's good and trying to pick him up to be that player, I love it. And I love that it worked for the past 2 weeks. And I'm hoping it continues more so, not even just for the being a Bills fan and for winning games, but for him, man. Like, how cool would it be to just have your brothers have your back, and that turns you around, and that makes you have some of the best, stretch of your career.
Yeah, I think like when people like me, and I've been called a homer, and honestly, to some extent, you know what? I'm a freaking fan of the Bills. So to some extent, yeah, I'm going to be a homer. But that being said, like, I still do abide by the concept of trust the process. But when I say trust the process, what I'm referring to is things like this and the culture that this team has built. Yeah, the Bills haven't won a Super Bowl, and obviously we want to see the Bills win a Super Bowl. But I also root for a lot of these guys, a lot of the good players on this team. And by all accounts, Tyler Bass is a really, really good person from what we can see from the outside, at least. And to watch somebody like him struggle, and then you start to struggle mentally, and you start to question, something you've done your whole life at this point. Am I cut out to do it? Like, to see him turn it around to some extent has been a really, really cool thing. And we just have to hope he keeps it up. Like, there's no guarantee that he will keep it up. But right now he sees it is 61-yarder against the Dolphins. And then you see him in this game, and he's absolutely nailing these kicks, unquestionably making them. There's a real chance, like you said, that the Miami Dolphins, the AFC East division rival, might have single-handedly turned around Tyler Bass's entire career. That's exciting to me. That's really exciting to me.
Thanks, Dolphins. Hopefully. We'll see.
All right, man. I want to just quickly, because I'm trying to get everyone out of here before this Dolphins game kicks off, because I do want to see them play.
Wait, we have a game tonight?
General thoughts on the Kansas City Buffalo game. Like, where's your mind at? What do you think we could expect from this game?
They're running the shit out of the ball, Kansas City. It's what they're good at. They are an immensely talented front with one of the best, if not the best, offensive play caller in football and, ever. He is going to run the ball. And the thing about the Chiefs is they stopped being sexy. And that should scare people, because when you look at this team and you see the games they play, they've been close, and they're 9-0, and 9-0 in the modern NFL is an unsustainable record. You expect the shoe to drop at some point, and it could very well be this week, just for the Bills' regular season track record against the Chiefs over the past 3 years. But the Chiefs are annoyingly unsexy because they're so consistent and so good at what they do, and that all stems from how they run the ball. It doesn't matter who's back there. It doesn't matter when they want to do it. If the Chiefs on the sideline determine that they want 4 yards, they're getting 4 yards. It's just what they do. And I think of them, and I think about this defense and the lapses they have against the run. Granted, I do think that the second half Bills defense is a real thing, and I do think they do learn from their mistakes. But the Chiefs mix it up, and the Chiefs are so good at getting those timely runs that it makes everything a lot more efficient for them because of the short downs and distances they're getting. And now that you have DeAndre Hopkins in the mix, and now that you can give some slack to Travis Kelce and Xavier Worthy, who they're going to use to try and get you over the top on opportunistic shots, it makes them difficult. So for the Bills defense, that's what I'm watching really, is just how do you respond to a team you've seen over and over again with a new cast of characters that can burn you deep, but also how do you get down in the trenches? Can you beat this O-line? Because this O-line had its way with you last year in that playoff game. And that's really where you got to win, because if you can take them away in the trenches, I actually do think that that disadvantageous position you put Mahomes in to press is what this team wants to get to, but it's very difficult because of how well they run the ball. And offensively, man, the injuries, I want to see what it looks like after the week's over and we're about to get into this game. If you don't have Kincaid and you don't have Coleman, so let's just assume that's what it's going to be, I still think this offense could be quite productive with Cooper on the field, with Knox as a blocker, as you pointed out earlier in this episode. I don't think it means they're toast. I just wonder, if teams, specifically the Chiefs, I should say, double up Cooper. Like, are we going to have a winner on any of the other parts? Is Knox going to be able to get a good matchup in whatever they decide to run, whether that's out of 11, if it's out of 12 with Quentin? There's a lot I have questions about. And, to briefly plug, tomorrow night, I'm talking about X factors in this matchup, and I'm doing more research on that. But I just say don't stray away from what you're good at. Keep running the ball and just try to get a little more tricky with it, Joe. If you got to run more play action, if you got to get this defense to hesitate, if you have to try and take Chris Jones out of the game by slowing him down in any way you can, this is how you do it. So I'm really excited, man. If you go 9-2, that'll be a ton of fun.
Yeah. I think that you kind of said my point without fully saying it out loud. And what the Chiefs are really, really good at is exposing what you're really, really bad at. And that's my biggest fear this game. Andy Reid is going to find what you're weak at on defense, and he's just going to attack it over and over again. You go back to that playoff game last year, that's all the Chiefs did. They just hit over the middle over and over and over and over and over because the Bills didn't have the linebackers to contend. When I think about this game, like you said, it's not sexy, but they're going to run the ball, and they're going to keep running the ball over and over and over again up the middle until the Bills can stop them. And I think one ray of sunlight here, and Biggie Scooby actually brought this up to some extent. Luckily for us, the Chiefs have 0 running backs who run 20 miles an hour. That's true. They don't have any long runs. In fact, the longest run by a Kansas City Chiefs running back this year is 15 yards. That's the longest run. Now, Patrick Mahomes does have a 30-plus yard run, but running backs, no run longer than 15 yards. But they're annoying because they're going to pick up 4 yards a carry. They're just going to keep doing it over and over again, keep getting first downs to drive down the field. So on that side of the ball, the Bills just have to find a way to stop it. They have to find a way to not stop it consistently, but get a tackle for a loss and push them further behind the sticks. That's the defensive strategy for them. On offense, it's Josh Allen. Don't turn the ball over, which he's been good at this year outside of this game yesterday. And then on top of that, you need to establish the run. They're not winning this game if they do not have Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, and Dalton Kincaid. They need one of them. Just give me one and they have a shot. But like you said, 9-2 would be awesome going into the bye week. If the Bills go 8-3, I just hope the fan base doesn't think that the sky is falling. Like the Bills will be fine regardless of the outcome of this game. That being said, like this is the premier matchup in the NFL. This is the biggest game that there is. It's Bills Chiefs. Everyone in the NFL knows it, despite Ravens fans and Bengals fans wanting to pretend like they're a part of the premier matchup. Everyone knows Bills Chiefs is the game of the season. It's been the game of the season for many, many years. The Bills have had their number in the regular season. The Chiefs have had their number in the postseason. So if the Bills do lose this game, maybe, just maybe, the Bills get theirs back this postseason. We see it flip around a little bit. Excited.
I'd love it, man. Yeah, no, I'd love it. One quick thing I wanted to point out too, and I talked about this last week as well. And, this week, until it's updated and I have to redo all my stats, I'm seeing that the Bills were 25th out of 26 so far of teams stacking the box this week. They only did it at 4.5%. When you talked about that matchup component, the thing for me is I think they're going to attack the interior defensive line, and they're going to double up on the interior, and they're going to try and push them back and create running lanes for Kareem Hunt and Carson Steele and Samaje Perine. And they're going to just try and do what we just described. They're going to be infuriatingly good at controlling the clock and getting those chunk plays, but chunk meaning 4 yards, not 15. So I think, what would be interesting, and the Bills don't do this for a reason, it's a part of their scheme, but I would love to see more stacked boxes. I would love to see them bring more people closer to the line,
Yeah.
have more bodies, and just try your best to take that away from them until you have to pivot. I just feel like it's something that they're not really expecting you to do because you haven't showed it much on tape. So make that adjustment and try to get there and beat them to that spot before they beat you. Take away those efficient carries. And then maybe if you get Patrick Mahomes into a true drop back game, that's where you can win. Now, that's asking a lot because he's the best quarterback in the NFL. He might not be playing like it this year, but I promise you he still is. But it's something that I think could just be enough of a wrinkle to just create enough of a disruption where it's enough to win you the game. Not that it's going to be your identity, but just enough of a pivot. And yeah, I hope they do it. I don't know if they're going to, probably not. But like with the way this defensive line, specifically the interior, has been, anything you could do to take away the Chiefs' game plan from them by switching it up without them expecting would be great. Yeah. I don't know if they do.
I again agree with you, which is again is unsurprising. We tend to agree on a lot of things. Any last thoughts as we're 5 minutes from kickoff for the Dolphins-Rams game?
Go Rams. Listen, dude, the thought of clinching this division on Thanksgiving is so hilarious. And just the fact that even no matter what happens this year, like if you do that, that's just the funniest thing to hang your hat on all off season is just every fan base. And listen, I don't get into a lot of beef with a lot of fans from the division because I'm a football golden retriever. I love football. If a team I hate is good, I still enjoy good games. But it's so funny to think of a world where we clinch before December and all of a sudden you're just looking at every Jet and Dolphin fan that just talked all that crap about the Bills just eating humble pie. That'd be fun. But no, man, I listen, I appreciate you having me here. I hope the Bills can pull it out on Sunday again. There's X factors that I think are huge in this game and I'm looking forward to watching it. And really just, I think if you just nail 2 of the next 4 games, you're in a good spot to not only win the division, but get a pretty high seed.
With you, man. With you. And thank you for joining me while David's doing his quote unquote adult things. Again, that is referring to work, not something else you sickos may have been thinking. Joe, tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, so my name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa. Tomorrow night, I do my show Under Review, and that episode will be covering the biggest X factors in this Bills versus Chiefs matchup. Players on offense, players on defense, the ones that we think the Bills can lean on to get them to victory against a very difficult opponent that we play every year. So if you like the show, check it out tomorrow night. If you don't like the show, check it out tomorrow night. Leave hateful comments. Tell me how much I suck. That'd be hilarious. I do think that if your hate comment is at the very least funny, I will throw it on the screen. Or if you just do funny comments like Spin, who I'm surprised didn't try a one-liner tonight while I'm on air because he gets me every single week, then, try that. That's fine. But no, seriously, Uber, thank you for having me. I enjoyed being David Fox for the evening, even though I'm not doing adult things. I am here in front of a computer. Looking forward to this game. Always appreciate when you join my show and appreciate the work you do. So thank you again. He said I showed you some mercy today. Yes, you did, Spin, but if you don't tomorrow night, it would be unsurprising.
For sure. You can find me on Twitter at UberHansen. I drop rooting interests on Wednesday on Reddit, but I also post them on Twitter. And then on Friday, I post a matchup preview for the game. This week, obviously, the Chiefs on si.com/NFL/Bills. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Like Joe said earlier, go Rams. And that's all we have for tonight. And as David says, bye-bye.